Good afternoon, Europe, and good morning, North America. I'm Roger Hilton, and welcome to this afternoon edition of Global Tremors. It only took 34 interviews, but we are finally doing our first Global Tremors recording here from GlobeSec HQ in Bratislava. So for everybody bearing with us for the first 34 interviews, thank you very much. On to some important business now. Fighting tyrants isn't cheap or easy. With the cost of weapons and humanitarian resources rising, Ukraine and its defenders need every inch of financial support to protect themselves and Western values. Live from Ukraine, I'm very glad to welcome in Christian Borys, founder of Saint Javelin, to join us the discussion. We will talk about his experience to date as a journalist in Ukraine, his motivation for starting Saint Javelin, as well as how the international community can overcome Ukraine fatigue. Christian, as a fellow Canadian, I'm so glad. Welcome to Global Tremors.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't realize you were Canadian too. Cool.
Small world here in Central and Eastern Europe. So as we normally do for our viewers, a few news items to bring your way. Yesterday, at least 3 blasts occurred in the Russian regions of Belgorod, Kursk, and Voronezh, with an airbase and an ammunition storage site among those affected. And earlier today, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg declared the alliance is ready to support Ukraine for years to come in the war against Russia. Stoltenberg said, "We need to be prepared for the long term. There's absolutely the possibility that this war will drag on and last for months and years." So, Christian, let's get into it. Before we get started, you had a bit of an interesting Twitter update today. Can you tell our viewers what you were doing this morning and if you maybe received any special awards or presents?
I completely forgot I put that on Twitter, actually. Yeah, I was at the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine, and I was giving the Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, a t-shirt, a Saint Javelin t-shirt specially made for him, and the Minister of Estonia, and we also made one for President Zelensky as well.
Well, Christian, that's quite an audience you had today. The Minister of Defense of Estonia, a good friend of ours at Global Tremors, already joined on. So we look forward to hearing a little bit about that. Now, Christian, all of the rage right now is about Saint Javelin, how it's taken over the internet. You guys are in New York Times, BBC, and even in our own CBC back home in Canada. Christian, before we get started on the t-shirt memes and all of that, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience versus a journalist covering Ukraine and what's it like since you've been back there right now?
Yeah, I just had lunch with a buddy of mine who we both came here in 2014, and he's lived here the whole time. I left in 2018 and I moved back to Canada. We were just literally discussing this subject because it's really interesting to see how back then there was a lot of focus on trying to, remain neutral and objectivity from different media, and to the point where it was obscuring the truth and the reality of what was going on. Like you'd be forced to write Russian-backed separatists or to put in Russia's claims that they were not involved in any sort of way whatsoever, which obviously looking back is completely absurd, right? And now the reality of journalism here is that people are able to tell the truth, and they are able to show that this is a full-scale Russian assault, and it has been since 2014. I think that's what people really, really have to remember, is that this whole thing started in 2014. This is just a massive, massive escalation of what Russia has been trying to do to Ukraine since 2014. So just from a journalist perspective, I think that that's one thing that has really stuck out to me. It's that now it's very clear to everybody who is good and who is evil here. And people are telling that story, the true reality of that story. And they're not trying to be objective and amplify what Russia says, because they live in a different reality, right? They lie to our faces, and they tell us that, what is black is white. And journalists used to have to publish both sides of that. And I appreciate, as a former journalist now, that people are focusing on telling the truth as opposed to trying to portray themselves as neutral and amplify Russia's lies.
I mean, it goes without saying, Christian, that the work that journalists have been doing, both, in Ukraine and those who came in at the Maidan Revolution and everything afterwards, the annexation of Crimea in 2014, they've been beating the drums very loudly, right, about telling the truth that this war is going on. And as I started off the interview, you were the 35th person we've interviewed since the invasion started on February 24th. And, we've just had so much analysis and input from people from Odessa, Kharkiv, Lviv, all over the country saying the truth. Now it's just a completely binary decision, a binary situation of good versus evil. Before we move on to the Saint Javelin, I mean, have you been able to contact or been in contact with any of the journalists who have been sort of around Bucha or Irpin? Because I mean, obviously the coverage from when you were there, from when you are now, is taken on a whole nother level in terms of the destruction and, just death now, surrounding the country.
Yeah, I was in Bucha and Irpin this week or on the weekend. And I've talked to a bunch of combat medics that were there, journalists that were there, seeing it for myself. So back in 2014, 2015, there was a town called Pisky right outside of Donetsk. And it was, the definition of destruction back in 2014 and 2015. And now what really struck me is that whole route from Kyiv through Irpin, through Bucha, through Borodyanka especially, everything is so utterly destroyed. Entire apartment buildings just completely blown up. And we hadn't seen that in 2014 and 2015 because there was no air power involved, right? Now you're seeing these buildings that were destroyed by rockets from helicopters or had bombs dropped on them in Chernihiv and in these regions around Kyiv. And the scale of destruction is just, it's really difficult to comprehend when you stand there and you look at what they've done. It's and then there's a lot of villages still outside of those main ones that everybody's talked about. Bucha and Irpin have got a lot of attention, but there's a lot of other ones. Friend of mine today was just telling me that he was at one yesterday and there's still lots of destroyed tanks and still lots of dead bodies that are, have just been left there. And I can only imagine how many of those villages that there are. Another thing that struck me is seeing some of those villages. They literally shelled every single inch of them. So the houses are all completely destroyed, there in one village, there wasn't one house that wasn't destroyed by the shelling, which it's just so comprehensively destroyed that the rebuilding of this country is just going to take a tremendous amount of resources and time.
No, I mean, it goes without saying, Christian. I mean, obviously, the early parts of the fighting from 2014, maybe you've seen the scale of destruction with what happened with the fight for the Donetsk airport, which, not so long ago was hosting, international flights and European flights for the European football championships. And now it goes without saying, I mean, when you see this drone footage of Mariupol and other cities, I mean, you can't help but, think that it looks like Dresden after the, the bombing of 1945. And, for us, not just coming from Canada, from the region and me here in CEE, I mean, it's still very eerie to see, right, that we're in 2022 and this type of destruction is still ongoing. So it's still very hard to digest, but, thank you for this opening comment on your experiences as a journalism and how much has changed since you first got there. Christian, let's get on to sort of your bread and butter right now. And, you're the talk of the town right now. February 24th, everybody wakes up and, it's a complete shock that Russia has invaded 21 or attacked 21 of Ukraine's 24 oblasts. And almost unanimously, there's a lot of support that's mobilized on states, and average people like you also, take action and say, we're not going to do it. Christian, just run us through, how you got the idea for Saint Javelin and sort of what the reception to it has been for all of our viewers who aren't necessarily familiar with it.
Yeah, sure. So we actually started it February 15th, I think, or February 14th, because of my time spent here and because of group chats that I'm still in and journalists that I still talk to, analysts that I still talk to. I had a pretty good understanding of what was about to happen. And I wanted to do anything that I could. And a friend of mine shared that meme that you see now in one of our chat groups. And he told me that he had printed stickers of it and sent it out to some friends of his across Europe. And, they had them as stickers on their laptops and stuff like that. And I wanted to do the same thing. So February 14th or 15th, I I asked our designer, I have a marketing company in Toronto. I asked our designer who lives in Lviv if he could take that meme, turn it into a file that I could print stickers with. So he did that. I put it up on Instagram and I just asked people, hey, does anybody want this? Does anybody want a sticker of it? I'm going to make some and I'm going to, donate the money. That first night, a bunch of people responded. So I made a website super quickly in 30 minutes and I put it up and we got 2 orders that night. And I was super pumped. I thought, wow, 2 orders. This is super exciting. The next day we got $1,000 and I ordered 100 stickers, which I thought was, enough to satisfy demand. And then the next day we got $5,000 in orders. And I just had to call the print shop again and say, I have no idea what's going on, but I need another 1,000 stickers. And it just kept on going from there. And I think a lot of the reason is because we were first and people were looking for ways that they could support Ukraine, because it was so obvious to people that there was, like you said, a binary decision here. It wasn't cloudy, right? It's good versus evil. Ukraine was a sovereign country, literally doing nothing but existing, and then Russia attacked, and people were immediately on the side of Ukraine, and they were trying to find ways that they could support Ukraine, and we just happened to be around already. And that's, just a testament to insights from my friends and, people telling me what they were seeing and the reality of what was about to happen. So, and from there on, we've just assembled a team. We had volunteers. Now we have about 10 people working on the project, and we're trying to move it from a charitable 1-month campaign to something that can last hopefully for decades. And the way I think we can do that is in the same way that Patagonia has a mission statement of we're in business to save the environment. I want us to be in business to rebuild Ukraine. Everything that we make is now going to be made in Ukraine. So we've already started that process. T-shirts, hats, all of that stuff. We want to do limited edition collections with Ukrainian artists and brands so that we can expose Ukrainian made things to our audience in the West, because we have over 40,000 customers in 70 different countries right now. And I know that we can become like a platform to bring all of this amazing talent and creativity that's here in production to the West. And I think it's great. I think Made in Ukraine will become a very important selling proposition. So I'm already, looking at ways that we can help rebuild some of these places that have been destroyed, because being in Kyiv right now, people are trying to get back to normal, even though obviously there's still a war going on out east and south. People are coming back and they do want to have some semblance of normalcy, right? So rebuilding is going to be a tremendously important thing going forward.
Christian, full admission up front, I'm a proud owner of more than 1 or 2 products from Saint Javelin. And, just like you, it was very viral. It was very organic. And what stood out for me from a product is that, like, as you said, inaction is almost as bad as poor action. Whereas, we go back to this theme about it being a binary decision where wearing, I think for a lot of people, if you see it on Twitter or people like, my friends who have also purchased, like, this is a uniform that we're all wearing in one way or another, right, to show our support for it. And listen, like, we can't go to the front lines and help. Not everybody can go to Poland and the borders of Slovakia to help with refugees. So, I think sort of, something to hold on to and say that this is where I stand on this issue. It's been unbelievable. And as you said in the New York Times and some of your other articles, it's turned normal people who wouldn't be focusing on Central and Eastern Europe, as well as just in politics, to be following about it. So, how do you explain the phenomenon of it taking off, about people just wanting to be part of this movement, right? It's sort of like a new pair of Nikes in the 80s with Jordan.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it was so blatantly obvious to people that I make the analogy of somebody being bullied, right? You can clearly tell when somebody's being bullied and you want to help the victim. In this scenario, Ukraine was attacked and it was the underdog, right? We all thought it was the underdog. And people were looking for ways that they could support, and they saw Saint Javelin. It's, it's a really cool symbol. We started putting out a lot of like funny content, memes and stuff like that. And people who understand it started spreading it. And then people who didn't care at all about Ukraine or understand any of the conflict or anything like that started to follow what we were putting out, because not only were we putting out memes, but we were sharing everything that was happening in Ukraine. And it's kind of like and this isn't, planned, or there's no strategy or anything. It's just kind of like what comes out of our heads, and whatever's happening at the time in Ukraine, we're trying to share all of it with people, right? So if it's a funny meme, or if it's a horrific thing like what happened in Bucha, as soon as what happened in Bucha started to emerge, I started sharing everything that I could about different articles and what journalists were discovering in all of those towns. So I think people started to see us as like a trusted resource, and they've latched onto it. And it's interesting you say it's like a uniform. I haven't heard anybody say that before, but I totally agree. It's a way that you wear your support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And yeah, I just hope that people continue doing that after, inevitably. I tell people this is phase one, right? You see the violence, and then there's a much, much, much longer phase two where the country has to be rebuilt, and people have to be healed. There's a lot of people that will have, tremendous effects after this, families that have been destroyed, people that have seen nightmarish things, and they will need a lot of counseling and support from the West. So yeah, that's why I think it's important for us to try to be in it for the long haul, and give those people that have already become fans of ours something for the future, so that they continue to support Ukraine and like wear their support. And yeah.
Yeah, well, Christian, again, in the preparation for the interview, I read a lot of the articles. And one thing that really stood out for me, I don't know if it was the New York Times article, but where somebody DM'd you from Spain saying, we just gave this system or we gave that product. So do us a solid and make us a shirt. And I mean, I think that's just unbelievable, even for a country like Spain that is so geographically sparse and doesn't necessarily have a direct connection, that people wherever they're messaging you are saying, hey, listen, like our government's stepping up and we want to be part of this movement, like this lifestyle and whatnot. Christian, before we go on to sort of the next issue about, as you said, this is only phase one of the project, I've already openly said I've bought products, I've donated. Can you just tell our viewers how the money or where the money is going for all of the products, that you're getting, considering that you have raised, I think it's over 1.5 million?
Yeah, we've sold over $2 million at this point. So we gave $500,000 to a registered Canadian charity called Help Us Help. So they were the initial charity that I wanted to donate to. So what they've been doing since 1991 is working with orphans in Ukraine. Their mandate changed in 2014 after the war started. And they started working with kids who had lost their parents, as well as veterans who were dealing with PTSD. And I spent a lot of time with that organization, and I saw a lot of people who had had their lives destroyed, widows and children who had lost their fathers. So I originally wanted the money to go to them, and then as the money just became so massive, we started looking at different organizations that we could support. So Ukrainian Red Cross, not ICRC, but Ukrainian Red Cross. Because a friend of mine is Evgeny Maloletka, who was the photographer who documented everything in Mariupol. He's the reason why, I believe he's the reason why the West changed the calculus for support in Ukraine. And he told me that Red Cross Ukraine was really important in Mariupol. So we donated to them. We're going to buy pickup trucks because there's combat medics here who have told me that they desperately need pickup trucks. We've bought stuff. We've donated to 2402.org, which is a foundation for Ukrainian journalists. So they outfit them with defensive equipment like bulletproof vests and helmets and IFAKs. I flew over from Canada with 1,000 tourniquets. We're doing all of these different things that I think are really tremendously important on the ground right now. Like, even though it seems like a ton of money, it's really not in the context of fighting a war and what these people really need. So I'm trying to find ways that we can disperse the money to people so that we can make their lives a little bit better. For example, we're going to buy 1,000 socks for some guys on the front because they asked for socks. They asked for instant soup. They asked for socks, stuff like that. And then I'm looking towards how do we help with rebuilding efforts? And there's just so many needs that need to be addressed. It's honestly, it's a lot of work to figure out what do you do with these funds and how do you put them to work in a way that maximizes the benefit, right? Because like I said, in the grand scheme of things, it's $2 million, right? If we can't buy weapons or anything like that. That is not our purview. Our purview is victims of violence. So what can we do to make their lives a little bit better? That's all that I'm thinking about in the ways that we disperse the money.
Yeah, well, I mean, Christian, thank you so much for providing this overview of where it's going in. I mean, what stands out for me from your answer, most importantly, is that you're spreading the wealth around, everything from the pickup trucks. And I'm also familiar with that website about sort of, bulletproof vests for the journalists. I mean, so it's great that everybody's sort of getting a little bit of piece about it. And that's also another incentive for, another potential buyer of the thing is that you don't know where the money's going, but one way or another, it's helping out. Christian, one personal question I just got to ask you, what is the best-selling product? I had some, I don't know if it's the hoodie or now you have the Saint Neptune going. The stuff is so diverse. And as you said in the interview, memes is how you speak on the internet. So, just be so curious to see what the best selling product is right now.
I think it's still the Saint Javelin sticker. I think that the black Saint Javelin t-shirt is number 2. And then I guess it just changes based on like what comes out. I think Saint Neptune did quite well. But yeah, it's and then NLaw is probably still up there. It's honestly, like, we haven't done any paid advertising. We haven't done any sort of like sophisticated marketing campaigns or anything like that. So it's just been, we haven't even been posting about the stuff that's for sale, actually. So we will start to do more of that. And I guess that will change what people are buying. But for now, it's still the stuff that we launched with originally, basically.
I mean, that's great. It's so interesting that it's the sticker that's still the number one seller. For me, it was a go-between, and I finally went with one of your very great vulgar theme shirts with the Ukrainian military on the front, which maybe is why I feel like such a military person. Christian, we're coming into sort of overtime here, the third period of our interview right now with our hockey analogy. You spoke about it earlier, and even with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg saying that this war could go on for many more months and many years. You talked about this being phase 1. How do you think that the international community or, local governments, how can we avoid or overcome the real threat of Ukraine fatigue? Because as we saw after 2014, it really ebbed and flowed. And, even after 6 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever it is now, it almost feels as if this has been going on forever. So for everybody out there, what are the messages or the mechanisms you think that, organizations like GlobeSec should be doing to keep this on people's radar and keep it relevant? Because obviously, this is still going on. The Azov steel plant still hasn't been taken, and Odessa is now under the crossfire of more missiles. So, how do we beat this Ukraine fatigue long term?
Honestly, it's a really, really good question. I think about that a lot, and I think that I don't know the answer. I think that when you tell stories that resonate with people, as opposed to, the daily news is important, but when you get in depth and you tell people stories that they can place themselves into that situation, right? For example, with Bucha, these people were just living regular lives. They never expected any of that to happen, right? When you go in depth and you tell the stories of what happened to those people, I think that you can touch people in a way that you can't with any sort of like, just daily news updates. So I think that a lot of that will still come out of Mariupol and some of these places like Kherson and some of these places that have been fully occupied or have just been so thoroughly destroyed, like certain regions in Kharkiv. I still think that there's been such a huge focus on Kyiv for the most part, because Kyiv's the capital, right? It was so it seemed like such an impossible thing that Russia would attack Kyiv that I think the world's attention inevitably came to the capital. But I think that as journalists continue to do their work outside of Kyiv, they'll discover more and more of the atrocities that Russia has committed. And if they can place people's minds into the frame of like, hey, that could also happen to me, I could see myself in that position. I think that's how you can keep people, at least some people, focused on what's happening. Inevitably, like without any war, any conflict, people's attention will divert and they'll start thinking about other things, and media attention will wane. But I think that telling those really in-depth stories about the human suffering and also now how life is coming back, how people are resilient, how these cities are resilient. I think those things are inspiring, and they help people to actually maintain support long term. So I don't know. I honestly have no idea if there's any way to ever do it, because it seems like it always wanes in any war, right? But I think that that's one way that you could try to do it.
I mean, Christian, from my reading of it, I think your initial counsel to everybody, whether it's at GlobeSec or beyond, is sort of about making a human connection on storytelling. Like you said, I mean, it's a yin and a yang a little bit. I mean, all of the suffering that's there, and also the rebirth and the resurrection, at the same time of these videos of, all of the journalists in Kiev about, shawarma shops reopening or a bike store. I mean, they're very small, but it just sort of goes back to saying that normalcy is slowly returning. And like you said, it evokes a powerful message, right? Seeing somebody reunited, or just the unbelievable coverage with animals and pets, and sort of the real humanity, and how everybody, it's a phenomenon that doesn't discriminate on anyone. So, Christian, we're about to end off here. Do you have any final remarks or anything that our viewers should be on the lookout for in the conflict, or any other initiatives that you want to bring to the forefront?
I think war wise, I think that we should continue to support Ukraine as much as possible. I think that there's this misconception that the war is over because it's not in Kyiv anymore. And I think that that's a dangerous thing to do, because support could start to curtail, or, fatigue can set in, and governments can say, hey, we've already given enough. I think that it's incredibly important that Russia is not allowed to remain on the territory of Ukraine, and isn't allowed to, move its equipment in closer. And there shouldn't be some sort of agreement where Russia is able to, kind of hold Ukraine hostage, right? So I think that the goal should be beat them back to their border. And I think that's a really, really important thing to do to restore normalcy and world order, but normalcy in Ukraine. So I just think that it's incredibly important that this fatigue doesn't set in, and that we do continue to support Ukraine militarily, and obviously with humanitarian assistance, and avoid this thinking that, hey, Ukraine's won, because it's not yet. There's still a lot of dangerous things that could happen here. So I would just say that.
Well, Christian, I think that's a very important reminder that, as you said, just because the war and sort of the theater has exited Kiev, and you still get sporadic missile strikes on Lviv, it is still it is still very much active, and all the people in the southwest of the country would take the take that the war is still very active and dangerous. Christian, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Global Tremors. More importantly, keep up the great work. We look forward to finding the updates. And for all of our viewers out there, time flies. We are only 35 days out until the 2020 Bratislava Forum, where Ukraine and a host of other important geopolitical, Central and Eastern European issues, sustainability will be on the docket. So we'll be bringing you more updates on our social media networks. So most importantly, as I always sign off, Christian, again, thank you, Slava Ukraina, and stay safe, everyone.